Hello, welcome to Team 5's final presentation for Ethics and Stakeholders Management. To begin, we're just going to start with a little opening. We prepared a game for you. On your sheet, you can see there's a pool of 12 words in a 3x3 grid. You can pick 9 of those words and put them in the grid. If you hear one of the words in our presentation, just check it off. If you get vertical, horizontal, or diagonal 3 in a row, you have won. Just to roadmap our presentation, we're going to start off with Schneider Downs accounting firm, move into Bernstein Law, and end with our other large firm, Google. And we're going to give you a shout out when it's time to move to the next slide. We're going to let Bradley take it over here and start with Schneider Downs accounting.
Alright, I'm Bradley Jan, and for our firm, we research Schneider Downs, which is a top 60 accounting firm that's located in Pittsburgh and founded in 1956. From Schneider Downs, we interviewed Rob Myers, who's a recent graduate from the University of Pittsburgh, and now works at Schneider Downs. An important thing in regards to ethics in accounting firms is the recent Enron scandal, which costed the entire company, and because of this, Rob said that the ethics are more important than ever for accounting firms. In regards to the formal and informal organizational systems of Schneider Downs, they pay key attention to the ethics and how the ethics fit into the company organization and how the recruitment process for employees and clients themselves and how ethics plays into that. And you can go on to the next slide. To name a few of the key examples of their organization of ethics, that they have several physical signs throughout the office which encourage the expected ethical behavior, and just having these around the office encourages the ethical behavior. A big point in when you log into your company server is that proper ethical etiquette is loaded up onto your hub along with your current work and how you can show it in your workplace. So not only does this help employees actually see what ethical behavior they need to do, it helps them partake in it. Local articles are also loaded, and this helps keep the company connected to the community. And Schneider Downs really encourages ethics to be a part of the company norms and culture. Ethical behavior is to be expected in all avenues in which you participate in, and you can go on to the next slide. Now in regards to the leadership of the company, they actually have an ethics community. It's usually a small group that consists of your manager, higher level accountants that have experience in the field, and it's also headed by 2 shareholders who appear in ethical review of each audit after it's completed. They have a list of checkboxes that review what you did right as well as what you could change in the future, and it also favors an ethical manager here due to the guidelines, but with employee training, Schneider Downs also encourages a moral person along with an ethical manager. And you can go on to the next slide. In regards to whistleblowing, they actually have an anonymous hotline. With this, employee identity is kept private and safe. Any misconduct which is reported and followed upon is swiftly brought to human relations. And we actually have a quote from Rob which shows how close you can be to your managers. But you can actually go on to the next slide. Schneider Downs doesn't just make an effort to Schneider Downs makes an effort to make sure that they and their employees are ethical, but they also make sure that their clients are ethical as well. They do a background check, which consists of 2 major reviews, which is done to eliminate any future possible ethical issues. Do a background check of the client and the history of any fraudulent behavior that shows up, makes the client immediately rejected. They also check with the client's past auditor to see the reason for a termination of their relationship, like why they changed onto Schneider Downs. And depending on that reason, Schneider Downs will either be more cautious with the employee or with the client, or actually reject the client completely. And that's it for the client relations, and I'm going to now pass it over on to Tim.
Like Brad said, my name is Tim. To start off, Schneider Downs is very focused on their employees and clients taking responsibility for their own work. They have all workers sign off on their paperwork, all auditors all shareholders sign off on their audit reports, and all of their documents have to be signed off by both parties. Basically, this is done so the company knows if something were to happen, who they're supposed to hold accountable, and so that the party who caused the problem knows that they're supposed to take responsibility for their actions. So, as I mentioned above, this kind of process is very compliance-based, which means that Schneider and Downs kind of forces their employees to be ethical by the process they set up and signing off. As we'll get into later, they're also very value-based, which means they teach and encourage their employees to be ethical as well. Move on to the next slide. So for employee training and orientation, like Brad mentioned before, we interviewed Rob Myers, who actually went through this same process a year ago. He was a recent grad from Pitt. And he said that very early on, Schneider & Downs beats into the brain to be ethical. So it's a 1.5 week long training process, and ethics is very important in the accounting world, so they start off with ethics training. The ethics training portion of that training process is actually repeated throughout the career so employees can stay fresh on their ethical values. Throughout that process, all new employees are asked to take an all-independence test just to kind of get a good feel for the employee's personality. And some of the areas of focus for this test is to basically share with the employees to not share any client data, and then also to not send any malicious files to other sites. Move on to the next slide. So we decided to compare Schneider & Downs' employee hiring process with Google's hiring process. To start off, Schneider & Downs, any new employees that they recruit, during the background check that was mentioned earlier, they check to see if you were caught cheating in college, and if so, that's an immediate red flag and you will not be hired. As far as the interview process goes, it's split up into 3 interviews. The first is a basic interview with management or an employee. The second is a more formal interview with HR, and the last and final interview is a 4 to 5 hour formal interview with someone from, or the head manager, and then an older and younger employee. The reason for the difference in this variance of interviewers is because they want to get an all-around feel for how you react in different situations, and just to basically get a good feel for your personality. So as I kind of already mentioned, all of these interviews is very based on ethical and moral values, so they know that they're recruiting someone and hiring someone that they feel confident would carry out the company's values. Move on to the next slide. Now for Google's hiring process, it's split up into 4 interviews. They're all, or similar to Schneider & Downs, it's the interviewers vary from people in management and then also potential colleagues. Some of these interviews include the first interview, which is a phone interview, obviously very informal. The second interview, if they like what they see, is an on-site interview where they actually bring you into Google, take you around different areas of the company, and test you on your area of focus. So all of these interviews are very technical based. They want to test you to make sure that you're going to be an attribute to their company. Next slide. So some similarities between Google and Schneider & Downs in their hiring process. Both have multiple interviews, and both are, the interviews vary depending on which interview you're at. And some differences, as we previously mentioned, Schneider & Downs is very personal based. They want to test your ethical values, whereas Google wants to test your technical and credential values. Now I'm going to move on to Brandon to discuss Bernstein Law.
Hi, I'm Brandon, and me and Mike focus on Bernstein Law. And Bernstein Law is located right downtown. It's a smaller firm in comparison to Schneider & Downs, and Google. And they focus on creditor law, and creditor law is basically focused on debt and the repayment of that debt. And in speaking with Bernstein about their ethics, one of the things that really stood out to us was their culture. And the reason that really stood out to us was because it seemed as if every answer that they gave to us made its way back to their culture and how they like to do things. And culturally speaking, we found out that they had a very low distance of power. And we felt that this would lead to more ethical behavior. And the reason we thought this was because each employee stated what they did and when they did it. They didn't have to look for a supervisor or a boss to give them the okay. So at the end of the day, they were right next to their consequences, and they couldn't distance themselves from the things that happened. we also realized that Bernstein seemed to have a lot of informal systems, and they kind of took the place of formal systems, speaking about ethically. And an example of this was the fact that they did not have an ethics officer, and they did not have a whistleblowing scenario written in stone. And the reason why they thought that this would work is because they state that each employee has enough power and enough communication skills that if they see something that they see as fishy or out of whack, that they can come forward and they can show it to their peers. And you can move on to the next slide. For an ethical day at Bernstein, there are many different ethical elements that make their way into the day-to-day. And the first element that we came across was Bernstein's core values. And basically, that's just a pamphlet that each employee is forced to keep at their workspace, and they are urged to go back to this whenever they're faced with an ethical problem. And all it really does is it hashes out how Bernstein feels as an organization ethically. The next element that we came upon was charity. And basically for charity at Bernstein, what they do is they have a charity of the month, and any worker that gives to that charity or gives to another charity during the month, they get to come in casual clothes, maybe jeans or a t-shirt on Friday, and it's just a fun little ritual to encourage the employees to follow up with their philanthropic CSR. And that's just another example of an informal system making its way into their ethics. The last element that we came across was diversity. And at first glance, looking at Bernstein's employees, they do not look like the most diverse group, but when you really take a look at it, they actually need to be higher in cultural intelligence, because as a creditor law firm, anybody can walk in needing their help. So basically, if they want to be as efficient as they can, they have to know everything about all different types of people. And now we're going to move on to Mike, and he's going to talk about some of the comparing and contrasting and our biggest takeaways.
Hi, my name is Mike. It's important to remember that Bernstein Law is a smaller firm when compared to the other two companies being discussed. Comparing Bernstein to Google is much like comparing a basketball team to a football team. Bernstein Law is similar to a basketball team because it has fewer employees and a smaller distance of power. Basketball teams have small coaching staffs and star players that can lead by example among the team, whereas a football team has power and tasks divided among more players and more coaches. Like, they'll have specific position coaches and coordinators to oversee multiple tasks. Football teams have, due to sheer size, these larger football-like firms must have a rigid control system. This is why firms like Google must have ethics officers and other formal systems overseeing ethics. Because it is not too large, Bernstein is able to monitor itself with the help of one main person in charge. Bernstein Law's ethical practices seem quite relaxed. We recommend that they put some slightly more formal systems in place. We believe that an ethical officer would benefit their ethical practices greatly. It is important that Bernstein Law avoid an ethical situation like IBM once had. IBM had a serious problem when the culture of their firm became too focused on profits, and their ethics suffered. Eventually, IBM was forced to give the firm to a person chosen by the government. We feel that Bernstein Law could benefit from an ethics officer because it would provide them. It would cause them to be proactive regarding their ethics. An ethics officer would allow Bernstein to proactively avoid ethical problems. If there were an ethics officer in place, there is less likely to be a leader abusing power and cutting corners specifically for profits. Our major takeaway from Bernstein Law was the drastic role of culture and size in ethics. Bernstein Law believes that its strong culture has allowed them to forego a formal ethics system. Bernstein Law's small base of employees makes monitoring ethics less of a burden, and therefore makes it possible for their employees to monitor each other. Bernstein Law is providing an example of how strong ethical culture can be as important as ethical standards. And now I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to introduce Google.